Divers have made quite a discovery off Nantucket Island in Massachusetts, the wreck of a German U-boat. A team of divers spent decades searching for it, and using sonar, they finally found the sub this week.
Researchers released these renderings of a German U-boat found on the seafloor just north of the country's coast.
In 1991, two divers descended into the Atlantic Ocean 60 miles off the New Jersey coast. What they found on the seafloor should not have existed: a German U-boat, fully intact, sitting in American waters. According to every official record, this was impossible. The German Naval Archives had accounted for every single U-boat lost in World War II. Every wreck location was documented, every loss confirmed. The American Navy agreed, the British Admiralty agreed. This submarine did not exist, but there it was, 230 feet down in the darkness, waiting. The divers spent 6 years trying to identify it. 3 men died in the attempt. When they finally recovered an artifact with a name engraved on it, the discovery rewrote half a century of history. The submarine had been officially recorded as sunk off the coast of Africa, 5,000 miles from where it actually rested. But the wrong location wasn't the most disturbing part. When investigators examined the damage patterns on the hull, they discovered something that changed everything. This crew wasn't killed by Allied forces. They were killed by something far worse. And some of them didn't die in the initial attack. They survived, trapped in sealed compartments, waiting in total darkness as death slowly closed in. It started with a fishing boat captain in 1991. He mentioned something unusual to a diver named Bill Nagel. The captain's nets kept snagging on something large, about 60 miles offshore. The coordinates didn't match any known wreck. Nagel was a legend in the wreck diving community. He'd explored dozens of shipwrecks along the American East Coast and knew the seafloor like his own backyard. If the coordinates didn't match anything in his mental database, that meant one thing: something new was down there. He assembled a team of experienced divers. Among them was John Chatterton, widely regarded as one of the best technical divers in the world. In September 1991, they motored out to the mysterious coordinates and dropped anchor. The depth finder showed a massive object on the bottom, 230 feet down. Chatterton was among the first to descend. The water was murky, visibility poor, but as he dropped deeper, a shape emerged from the darkness that made absolutely no sense. A submarine, German construction.
The discovery ends the conspiracy theory that the submarine had made it to South America with Nazi officers inside.
The distinctive conning tower design was unmistakable. The hull appeared largely intact, sitting upright on the sand. Hatches were closed. The boat looked almost preserved, as if someone had gently placed it on the bottom rather than destroyed it in combat. Chatterton surfaced, confused and honestly a little shaken. He immediately checked every reference he had access to. He consulted maritime records, contacted other divers, reviewed historical documents. No German submarine was recorded lost anywhere near the New Jersey coast. The closest documented U-boat wreck was hundreds of miles away. According to every official history, this submarine simply did not exist. The divers contacted the Naval Historical Center in Washington.
A team of divers spent decades searching for it, and using sonar, they finally found the sub this week.
Officials listened politely, then dismissed the claim entirely. The records were clear, they insisted. All U-boat losses were accounted for. Whatever the divers had found, it wasn't a German submarine. Or if it was, it must be a boat already documented elsewhere. But Chatterton had seen it with his own eyes. He'd touched the steel hull. He'd swum through water that hadn't been disturbed since 1945. The submarine was real. Someone was wrong. Either the divers were mistaken about what they'd found, or the combined naval archives of Germany, the United States, and Britain had made an error that had persisted for half a century. The divers gave the wreck a temporary name while they worked to identify it. They called it U-Who. Here's the thing: this mystery would consume them For the next 6 years, it would cost 3 men their lives. And when the truth finally emerged, it would force historians to confront an uncomfortable reality about how little we actually know, even when we think the records are complete. Before we talk about what happened to this submarine, you need to understand what it was doing out there in the first place. U-869 was a Type 9C/40, one of Germany's long-range attack submarines designed to cross the Atlantic and hunt Allied shipping in distant waters. Built at the Deschimag shipyard in Bremen, the boat was commissioned in January 1944. The commander was Helmut Neuberg. He was 29 years old, young for a U-boat captain, but not unusually so by late 1944. The war had consumed experienced officers faster than the Kriegsmarine could produce them. The crew numbered 56 men. They were a mix of veterans who'd survived previous patrols and young sailors who'd never seen combat. The average age was barely 20. Some were teenagers pulled from homes and schools to serve aboard a machine designed to either sink ships or be sunk itself. They trained together for months in the Baltic Sea, learning the intricate choreography of submarine operations. Every man had a role. Every role was essential. In the confined steel tube of a U-boat, incompetence didn't just get you killed, it killed everyone. By late 1944, the U-boat service had become something close to a death sentence. Early in the war, German submarines had dominated the Atlantic. Wolf packs hunted Allied convoys with devastating effectiveness, sinking millions of tons of shipping. The U-boat was the terror of the seas, invisible and lethal. But the Allies had adapted. Radar systems detected surface submarines at night. Sonar tracked them underwater. Long-range aircraft patrolled the shipping lanes, dropping depth charges on any contact. Escort groups developed coordinated tactics. Code breakers read German communications and routed convoys away from danger. The hunters had become the hunted. By the time U-869 was ready for combat, the survival odds had inverted catastrophically. U-boats were being destroyed faster than Germany could build replacements. Of the roughly 40,000 men who served in the U-boat arm during the war, approximately 30,000 would die. That's a casualty rate of 75%. No other branch of any military service on any side suffered losses that severe. The men who climbed aboard U-869 for its first war patrol understood these statistics. They'd watched other boats depart and never return. They'd attended memorials for friends who vanished somewhere beneath the waves. They went anyway. In November 1944, U-869 departed from Kristiansand, Norway, bound for the American eastern seaboard. The orders were straightforward: cross the Atlantic, patrol the shipping lanes off New York and New Jersey, sink anything flying an Allied flag, return home. The submarine slipped beneath the gray waters of the North Sea and headed west into the Atlantic. 56 men sealed inside a steel cylinder, sailing toward a coastline they would never see. U-869 was never heard from again. After the war ended, naval historians on both sides undertook the grim task of accounting for every submarine lost in combat. The German records were meticulous despite the chaos of defeat. The Allied records were thorough, cross-referenced with attack reports and intelligence intercepts. Every U-boat that failed to return was assigned a cause of death and a location. For U-869, the official determination seemed straightforward. On February 28, 1945, Allied forces reported attacking a submarine off the coast of Morocco near Gibraltar. The engagement was logged, the coordinates recorded, the The kill confirmed. When analysts matched the date and location against U-boats known to be operating in the area, U-869 fit the profile. The submarine had been assigned to patrol those waters. It had stopped responding to radio contact around that time. The conclusion was obvious. U-869 was sunk off Gibraltar by Allied forces. Case closed. The German Naval Archives accepted this determination. The families of the 56 crew members were notified that their sons and husbands had perished in the eastern Atlantic, not far from the African coast. Memorial records listed Gibraltar as the final resting place. For nearly 50 years, no one questioned it. The submarine was accounted for. The dead were mourned. The war moved further into history. But here's where it gets interesting. That official story was completely wrong, and the wreck sitting 60 miles off New Jersey was about to prove it. The wreck site was not a place for casual exploration. 230 feet of water separated the surface from the submarine. At that depth, the ocean becomes hostile in ways most people never experience. The water temperature hovered near freezing year-round. Currents swept unpredictably across the sea floor, capable of pinning a diver against the hull or dragging them away from the anchor line. But the depth itself was the primary killer. At 230 feet, nitrogen narcosis begins impairing judgment. Divers describe the sensation as similar to being drunk. Simple tasks become confusing. Time distorts. Critical decisions get delayed or forgotten entirely. Every breath at that depth consumes air at a rate 7 times faster than at the surface. A tank that lasts an hour in shallow water empties in minutes. When the air runs out, there's no swimming to safety. The surface is too far away. The submarine's interior multiplied every danger. Jagged metal edges waited to snag equipment or slice through suits. Collapsed compartments created mazes with no clear exits. Decades of accumulated silt covered every surface. The slightest movement stirred it into blinding clouds. A diver who became disoriented inside the wreck might never find the way out. Despite these hazards, the divers kept returning. The mystery demanded answers. John Chatterton made dive after dive, penetrating deeper into the wreckage with each attempt. He found human remains almost immediately, bones scattered through the control room, mixed with debris and silt. He found artifacts, dishes, equipment, personal items, but nothing with a name, nothing with a hull number. German submarines carried identifying tags throughout their interiors.
Light hull of a submarine. 1 or 2 German anti-submarine mines exploded there.
Manufacturer plates, serial numbers, designations stamped into equipment. This submarine had none. Every identifying mark appeared to have been removed intentionally. The mystery deepened with every dive. Then the wreck started claiming lives. In October 1992, Chris Rouse and his son Chrissy descended to the submarine. Both were experienced divers. Both understood the risks. Something went wrong in the darkness below. They stayed too long, went too deep, pushed beyond the margins of safety. Both surfaced unconscious. Both died before reaching the hospital. Father and son, killed by a submarine that officially did not exist. The diving community was devastated. Some argued the wreck should be abandoned. The mystery wasn't worth more deaths, but Chatterton refused. If anything, the tragedy made identification more urgent. The Rouses deserved to know what killed them. The German families deserved to know where their sons actually rested. The obsession continued, and what the divers were about to discover would be more disturbing than anyone imagined. As the divers accumulated hours on the wreck over months and years, a picture of the submarine's final moments began to emerge. The evidence was written in twisted steel and shattered compartments. The damage was concentrated in the control room area, the nerve center of any submarine. A massive hole gaped in the pressure hull. The metal was torn inward, peeled back by tremendous force. This was not the gradual failure of a boat losing a battle against flooding. This was instantaneous, catastrophic. Whatever hit U-869 had killed it in seconds. The pattern of destruction told a specific story to anyone who understood naval warfare. Depth charges leave a particular signature.
There's no time for celebration. Suddenly, the submarine is rocked by explosions, depth charges.
They explode above or beside a submarine, crushing the hull through concussive force. The damage spreads across a wide area. The steel bends and buckles under external pressure. The damage on U-869 looked nothing like that. The hole was focused, precise. The force had come from a single point of impact. The steel was torn inward, not crushed from outside. This was torpedo damage. But that conclusion created an immediate problem. Who had torpedoed U-869? Allied records contained no submarine engagements anywhere near the New Jersey coast during the time frame when U-869 would have been operating. No destroyers reported torpedo attacks in the area. No aircraft claimed a submarine kill at those coordinates. If an Allied vessel had sunk a U-boat 60 miles from the American mainland, it would have been documented, celebrated, recorded in multiple, overlapping sources. There was nothing. The Allied forces had not killed this submarine. The answer, when researchers finally assembled the evidence, was almost too terrible to believe. German torpedoes in late 1944 were equipped with acoustic homing systems. The technology was cutting edge for its time, designed to give U-boats an advantage against maneuvering targets. These torpedoes could be fired in the general direction of a ship and would then seek out the loudest source of engine noise in the water. The technology was also deeply flawed. Sometimes the acoustic seekers failed to acquire a target. Sometimes they locked on to the wrong sound. And sometimes, in a nightmare scenario that German submariners knew about but could do nothing to prevent, the torpedoes circled back toward the loudest noise in the water, the submarine that had fired them. Evidence from the wreck suggested U-869 had launched a torpedo shortly before its destruction. The tube positions, the state of the torpedo room, small details that all told a story of a boat that had been hunting, not hiding. The most probable scenario was straightforward and horrifying. U-869 had detected a target. Commander Neuberg had ordered a torpedo fired. The weapon malfunctioned. Instead of tracking toward the intended victim, it curved through the water, seeking noise, and found the loudest source available. U-869's own diesel engines. The crew would have had no warning. Acoustic torpedoes were silent. There would have been no approaching noise, no time to react, no chance to dive or maneuver. One moment the men were at their stations, waiting for the sound of a distant explosion, confirming their kill. The next moment, their own weapon detonated against the control room. The flooding would have been immediate in the blast zone. Anyone in the control room died within seconds. But here's what haunted the divers most. U-869 was a large submarine, over 250 feet long, divided into multiple watertight compartments. The men in the forward torpedo room and the aft engine spaces were separated from the control room by heavy steel doors. Not everyone died in the explosion. Some of the crew was still alive when the submarine began its fall to the sea floor. The interior of U-869 told a story of violence and chaos. Human remains were scattered throughout the accessible compartments, bones mixed with debris. Bodies had been thrown by the force of the explosion, tumbled as the submarine spiraled downward, then settled randomly as the boat came to rest. Most of the bones in the control room area showed evidence of violent trauma. Fractures consistent with blast impact. These men had died instantly when the torpedo struck. They were the lucky ones, but remains were also found in the aft compartments, the engine room, the maneuvering spaces, areas separated from the control room by watertight doors. The damage pattern suggested these doors had been sealed either before the explosion or immediately after. The aft sections showed no direct blast damage. The men in those compartments had survived the initial impact. Chatterton understood what this meant. When the torpedo detonated, the control room flooded instantly. The bow section would have followed within seconds or minutes as water found pathways through damaged bulkheads. But the aft compartments were intact, sealed. The men inside would have felt the explosion, heard the catastrophic roar of water flooding the forward sections, felt the deck tilt as the submarine lost buoyancy and began its descent. They would have known exactly what was happening. 230 feet is not survivable without proper decompression. Even if the men in the aft sections could open a hatch, even if they could escape the sinking submarine, they could not reach the surface alive. The pressure differential would kill them. They were sealed inside a steel coffin, sinking toward the bottom with no possibility of rescue. The lights would have failed when the electrical systems flooded. Emergency lanterns might have provided flickering illumination for a time. The men would have gathered in the darkness, feeling the hull groan under increasing pressure, waiting for the end. The descent to 230 feet takes only minutes. The air inside a sealed compartment lasts longer. Those men had time to understand their fate before it arrived. In 1997, 6 years after the first dive on the wreck, John Chatterton found what he'd been searching for: a knife, buried in silt, wedged beneath debris in the aft section. He brought it to the surface and cleaned away the corrosion. Engraved on the handle was a single word: Horenberg. Research confirmed that Martin Horenberg was a torpedo man assigned to U-869. His service record was documented in German Naval Archives. His knife was now resting in John Chatterton's hands, recovered from a submarine that officially sank 5,000 miles away. The impossible wreck had a name: U-869. It had been assigned to patrol off Gibraltar, but it was actually destroyed off New Jersey. It wasn't killed by Allied depth charges, surface ships, or aircraft. It was killed by its own malfunctioning torpedo in waters it should never have been in. 50 years of official history were wrong. The identification of U-869 sent shockwaves through the naval history community. For half a century, the official record had stated with absolute confidence that this submarine rested off the coast of Africa. Everyone agreed. Everyone was wrong. German naval historians were skeptical when first contacted, but Chatterton had evidence that couldn't be dismissed. The knife with Horenberg's name, photographs of the hull, the torpedo tube configurations, the location of crew remains matching the roster of U-869. The historians reviewed the evidence. Then they quietly began the process of amending half a century of official documentation. U-869's final resting place was corrected from the Eastern Atlantic to the Western Atlantic, from African waters to American waters. The cause of loss was amended from Allied attack to probable torpedo malfunction. But for the families of the crew, the implications were far more personal than an updated file entry. For 50 years, the relatives of U-869 sailors had believed their sons and husbands died off Gibraltar. Some had made pilgrimages to the Moroccan coast. They stood on beaches, staring at water that they believed held their loved ones. They threw flowers into waves that carried them toward an empty stretch of ocean, 5,000 miles from the actual grave. When Chatterton and his research partner, Richie Kohler, began contacting the German families, the reactions were complicated in ways that simple grief couldn't capture. Some families expressed profound gratitude. Finally, after decades of uncertainty, they knew the truth. Others were devastated in ways they hadn't anticipated. Grief they believed they'd processed decades earlier returned with unexpected force. The hardest conversations involved what the evidence revealed about how the men died. Some families learned that their relatives had been in the control room. Those men died instantly when the torpedo struck. It was violent, but it was fast. Other families learned something worse. Their sons had been in the aft compartments. They'd survived the initial explosion. They'd sealed the watertight doors and listened to the forward sections flood. They'd felt the submarine sink. They'd waited in darkness for an end that took its time arriving. Friedrich Neuberg, the brother of Commander Helmut Neuberg, traveled from Germany to New Jersey after the identification was confirmed. He stood on the deck of a boat positioned above the wreck site. Below him, 230 feet down in the darkness, his brother's submarine rested on the sand. He dropped flowers into the water. They floated briefly on the gray Atlantic swells, then scattered on the current and disappeared. 50 years of wondering had ended. His brother was here, not Gibraltar, here. The discovery forced uncomfortable questions beyond personal grief. If official records were wrong about U-869, what else was wrong? How many other submarines, ships, aircraft, and soldiers were documented in incorrect locations? Archives are compiled by humans under wartime conditions. Errors occur. Assumptions get treated as facts. Once something is written in an official document, it tends to stay written regardless of accuracy. The U-869 case proved that even the most confident historical conclusions can be completely mistaken. But the discovery also raised questions about cost. 3 divers died exploring U-869: Chrissy Rouse, Steve Feldman. The submarine that had killed 56 German sailors in 1945 claimed 3 more lives in the 1990s. The wreck had become a double graveyard. Some in the diving community argued the obsession wasn't worth the price. The German sailors were dead, regardless of whether anyone identified them. Their families had already mourned. No identification is worth a human life. Others believed the opposite. The divers who died were pursuing truth voluntarily with full knowledge of the risks. The families who finally learned the accurate fate of their sons received closure that 50 years of official history had denied them. Truth has value, even when it comes at a cost. There's no resolution to this debate. There never is when the dead cannot speak for themselves. U-869 remains on the sea floor. Unlike military wrecks in European waters, it's not formally protected as a war grave under American law. Divers can still visit if they accept the substantial risks. The submarine continues to decay. Salt water corrodes steel relentlessly. Eventually, the hull will collapse entirely, becoming an unrecognizable debris field. Whatever evidence remains inside, whatever secrets the boat still holds, will be lost when the structure fails. The window for learning from U-869 is closing year by year. U-869 sits 60 miles off the coast of New Jersey, 230 feet down, closer to Atlantic City than to Gibraltar, where the world believed it rested for half a century. 56 men remain inside. Most were younger than 25 when they died. Some were teenagers who'd never seen combat before their first and only patrol. They left Germany believing they were sailing toward Africa. They ended up in American waters, killed by their own torpedo, filed in the wrong location by their own navy, forgotten in the wrong ocean for 50 years. The divers who found them paid for the discovery with obsession, with years of their lives, and in 3 cases, with life itself. The mystery is solved. The crew is identified. The coordinates are accurate now. But the water is still dark at 230 feet. The hull is still collapsing slowly into the sand. The bones are still scattered where violence left them, waiting for visitors who descend less frequently with each passing year. The ocean kept its secret for 5 decades. It only surrendered the truth when someone was willing to die for it.